So what we're doing here really is the Hebrew that you may or may not be learning in Ulpan, whether you're in Ulpan or not, whether you have the chance to use Hebrew on a regular basis or not. This is really the Hebrew that, both from my personal years of experience working with Olim and other internationals in Israel, but also hearing from fellow Olim what's missing, what they need to live an everyday life in Israel, right? Most of us are coming, not living in a Melkaz Klita, in an absorption center like most Olim did up until very recently. We're all coming from, not all coming from, but a lot of us are coming from white collar, higher education backgrounds. We want to live as similar a life here as possible, and that's what we're trying to do here. By focusing on everyday Hebrew that you are hopefully using or want to use, from paying bills, lodging a complaint, understanding the news in Hebrew, not in English. Today, because of, this is actually a review, we did this a few months ago, and it's good to do a review. We're going to go over the words that have to do with law enforcement and police, as it's constantly in the news now, both because of the pandemic, but also because of the protests surrounding the Prime Minister and the handling of the pandemic. This isn't politics. We're not here to debate it, but it is to understand what the words are that are being used on a regular basis. So whether you're going to the protests in Yerushalayim or elsewhere in the country, or whether you're just trying to keep up with the news, we're going to go through the vocabulary that's used. As every week, Nefesh B'Nefesh is recording this. So if you can't take a screenshot or write down the words that I'm going to share with you, that I'm about to share with you, the screenshot, you'll get a recording of this session so you can go back and review it on your own, which is a great way anyways to get the vocab down. And any questions that you may have, by all means, at the end, I'll go through them. You can write them in the meantime in the chat window, and I'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Ali, if you can hear me, if you can allow screen sharing.
Yep.
Awesome, thanks. Share, there we go. Okay, so as always, let me move the window down. As always, the Hebrew, I put the Hebrew on the right-hand side with vowels because I like you all, but also because we're at very different levels here and there's a lot of beginners. As always, an important reminder, important kind reminder that in everyday Hebrew, whether it's in block script like you see here or in cursive, vowels are not typically found. So this is really meant as an aid, and just like training wheels on a bike, you are meant to wean off them. Except when a word can be spelled in different ways, can be spelled the same way, but is pronounced different ways. And you'll see that in the news. The next time we do a media literacy class, I'll show you examples of that. Anyways, transliteration is in the middle. This is for American English. And on the left-hand side is the English for it. So let's get started. So as you see, we have two words at the very beginning for the police. Shitur or shitur, you can't say resh, so shitur or shitur, and mishtara. Shitur is the act of policing, right? You'll see this word used, you'll see this word on the side of some cop cars in Israel. You'll also see it being used as the concept of policing something, or a people, or a situation is shitur. It's the verbal noun, and that's the form that it takes. So you know that's different as opposed to the next thing, which is mishtara or mishtara. Mishtara is the police. It's the police force. Just like we have the word in Hebrew memshala. Memshala is a government. Mishtara is the police force. This is, by the way, the entire police force. This is not an individual policeman or policewoman, nor is this a unit. This is the all police. The way it works in Israel, just also as we explain the context of the words we use here, in Israel, there is the Israel Police, Mishteret Israel. That's the official name of the police in Israel. It's not, there are units, meaning that you'll be stationed in certain districts. Israel is broken down into 6 legislative districts, not legislative, that's a bad word, judicial districts. And within those, there are precincts. That's the word we often use with police, right? Precincts. But as a police force, you are drafted or you apply to be in Mishteret Israel. You do not apply, as opposed to some other countries, for example, the United States, you do not apply to be in Mishteret Washington, D.C. or Mishteret New York, right? You apply to be in Mishteret Israel. And from there, you're then assigned a precinct, sometimes based on where you live, sometimes not, but just so you know how it works in Israel. Okay, now an individual police, right? Policeman is a shoter. Here we are in row 4. Shoter, and a female police and a policewoman is usually female, is a shoteret. Okay, so shoter, individual policeman, shoteret, individual policewoman, a group of police, not the same thing as a police force, but let's say a group of police men or police women is shotrim or shotrim, that's mixed gender, and shotrot are just female police. Okay? And like I just said, Mishteret Israel is the official name of the police in Israel. There is no Mishteret Tel Aviv or Mishteret Yerushalayim or Mishteret Carmiel. It's Mishteret Israel. And then within that, they have individual precincts. They're usually called a Melchav. You don't need to know those. Just know that Mishteret Israel, it's one unit, it's one force in Israel, and the number is 100. Okay, so if you need to call the police, it's 100 on your phone, from any phone, just 100 dial. Okay. In Israel, we have other forms of policing. We're not talking about the army. The army serves a different function in Israel, but we have something that sits between the police over here, which is civilian, Israeli civilians, and something over here, which is Tzahal, which is the army. We have what it's called is Mishmar HaGvul. Mishmar HaGvul, or it's known as it's often referred to as its acronym or its abbreviation, which is Magav, stands for, Mishmar HaGvul stands for Border Patrol. Mishmar is a patrol, like shomer. Lishmor is to watch or to guard. So Mishmar is a guard, as in like National Guard in America. And Gvul is a border. Mishmar HaGvul is a security service that sits in between the police and the army. They literally do sit on the border, particularly along the Green Line between the West Bank and the rest of Israel, or however you want to use it, say that politically. They also man most of the border crossings with our neighbors, but they also work the checkpoints along the Green Line. Magav is also often on patrol in Eastern Jerusalem. They're often brought in as additional force when there are large demonstrations or protests. And we've seen that in the last several months in Yerushalayim and in other places in the country. Mishmar HaGvul can be part of your army service. So you can be drafted and serve that as part of your service. It sits in the middle, like I said, between the police and the military. So it's often used in a way that's more ambiguous than in other countries in terms of police and policing rather than law enforcement. But you'll see this a lot. Magav is the word that we use. And then in slang, Magavnik is someone who serves as Mishmar HaGvul. So Magav is the abbreviation, like I said. And you know it's the abbreviation when you see those two apostrophes, as we've always said. And nik at the end of a word, nun, yud, kuf, just like kibbutznik or refusnik or any of those other words, is a loan from Slavic languages. And it refers to a person who is that, right? So a moshavnik or a kibbutznik is someone who lives on a moshav or a kibbutz. A refusnik was one of the prisoners of Zion, one of the Soviet Jews who was imprisoned in the former Soviet Union for ideological reasons and who refused to give up their identity, their Jewish identity. And a magavnik is someone who, who serves in Magav. Okay, So let's get to some other words that have to do with policing, because there's a lot of them. I tried to pick out the ones that are the most relevant, the ones that you're going to hear on a regular basis. Again, whether you read the news, whether you are going to one of the protests, or just wanting to know how the police works. That's a rather important part of society, especially nowadays with more awareness of what the police do and don't do, should and shouldn't do. All the more important how to know how to use these words in Hebrew and in Israeli context. So this is a big word. We hear this word a lot nowadays, but in general, it's a big thing in Israel, is achifa. Achifa means enforcement, right? Because that's the role of the police, is to enforce the law. Achifa is also an important thing when it comes to, for example, here in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has very strict rules with regards to electric bikes and kolkinetim, the electric scooters. But one of the major complaints we hear in Tel Aviv is that there is no achifa. There's no enforcement of some of those rules. And we see that, right? People who ride their electric bikes on sidewalks, which is illegal. People who are not wearing a helmet, which is illegal. The issue is a matter of achifa. There isn't enough people employed to do achifa, whether that's police, whether that's municipality. Achifa is a very important word you're going to hear again and again in Israeli society about. We have some great laws on the books. Where's the enforcement of it? Okay. The next word, nayedet. Nayedet is a great word. Nayedet means we translate this as a patrol car or a mobile unit. It comes from the word nayad. Nayad we talk about a lot. My nayad is currently charging, but a nayad means mobile. Okay, it comes from the word yad. Yad is hand. The idea is that it's something that can be moved with your hands. So for example, I'm speaking to you right now on Zoom, but I'm speaking on a machshev nayad. Machshev is a computer, nayad is mobile. Put them together, machshev nayad is a laptop. Okay, so in Hebrew, a laptop computer isn't referring to something you put in your lap. It's something that's referring to something you can put in your hands, like I just did. Okay, so a machshev nayad is a mobile computer, literally a mobile computer. We would translate it as a laptop. A phone, a telephone nayad, or just a nayad on its own, when you hear that word nayad, means mobile, as in mobile phone. One of the many ways we call a cell phone, right? So a nayad, someone just says nayad, or for example, they write to you nayad, colon, and then a long number. That's their cell phone number. Okay, most people will just say that, nayad. And a telephone number, I mean, you can always tell by the area code whether it's a landline or a cell phone line. But nayad, most of the time, is referring to either something mobile or to a cell phone. Okay, so a nayedet is a mobile unit, right? It's one of the many words that we have for a police car, but also, for example, when it has to be the wagon, all those slang words way back when in English for paddy wagon, for example, all those different things. In Hebrew, they're all called a nayedet. So that can be an individual car, like a sedan, or one that you use either to transport equipment or people who are arrested, is a nayedet, okay, because it's mobile. All right, the next word. This word you probably know already. You probably know it in another context, but it's no less important here. It's a very important word. Is doch or duach. And as you see, it's an abbreviation, right? The moment you see two apostrophes over here, the moment you see two apostrophes at the end of a word or next to the end of the word, you know it's an abbreviation for something. In this case, doch, you'll hear it pronounced, but also duach, which is actually the correct way to say it, but most people say doch, stands for din v'cheshbon. Din means judgment or law, and cheshbon means account. In this case, it's referring to accountability. So you put those two concepts together, right? Judgment or law, account, that's the word that we use for report, but it can also mean a citation. So when you're delivering, for example, a report in your office or to your boss or to something like that, you are giving them a doch or duach. If you are getting a ticket from a police person for doing something like driving your electric bike on the sidewalk or illegally parking or whatever it is, you are getting a doch or duach, okay? This is the word we not just use for a report, a citation, it's also a ticket. It's not the literal word for ticket that we have in other parts of Hebrew. That's a kartis. A kartis is a ticket, like a ticket to a movie or a ticket to a concert. Not a ticket like you got a traffic ticket or a citation. That's this word doch or duach, okay? That is the actual piece of paper or it's sent to you by mail. This is that. And the plural is duchot. So just add a ot at the end of it and you get citations. But duchot is the modern word in Hebrew for a report or citation. We also have a word that has been created out of this. I'm going to write it here just on the side so you see it in Hebrew. It's not going to be, it's not going to be put with vowels, but it's a good word to know because we use this. You hear this word quite a lot also. Let me just make it a little bit bigger for you. Is ledaveach. Ledaveach means to report. And this comes from the same word doch. So in modern Hebrew, we took the abbreviation of a concept, abbreviated spelling of the concept, and we turned it into its own verb, verbal noun. Ledaveach means to report. Divuach, which you often hear a lot in the news, divuchim, reports or reporting from somewhere, is this word. It's similar, for example, the same idea of creating a new word in Hebrew out of something that already exists. I'll give you another great example, is this word, right? This word is another great example, shuk. Shuk is an open air market in Hebrew, right? It's a market, but specifically a more open air market. We have the similar concept throughout the Middle East. In Arabic, it's souk. In Hebrew, it's shuk. From this word shuk, we get the word, and this is actually very important for my business, and no less to many businesses around the country, is this word, lishavek. Lishavek is to market something, not to go to the market, as in the act of marketing. Shivuk, which is the verbal noun of lishavek, is marketing. Marketing is in, advertisement and so forth. Right, so we do this a lot in Hebrew when we're creating new words, because we're talking about a very ancient language that had to be modernized very fast. We have a lot of these words that are created in recent times. Some of them are standardized, but what's by the Academy for the Hebrew Language, which is the government body in charge of it. And some of it, just like all languages around the world, is created just by what you and I create on our own and speak. Ledaveach, leshavek, are two great examples of words that we use that are very modern words to express something very everyday. But for example, ledaveach comes from doch, and doch comes from din v'cheshbon. Din v'cheshbon are two words that you will hear throughout Jewish literature, Jewish tradition for millennia, right? But we put them together in a modern context, and we get the word for report or citation or a ticket. I think that's very cool. Anyways, next word. Next word's a rather important word when we're talking about the police is ne'etzel. Ne'etzel is the past tense third person for to be arrested, right? So if someone has been arrested, they have, and it's a male, so he was arrested is hu ne'etzel, okay? It also comes from the verb to stop as in place. We talked about this before, right? La'atzor, which has the same root, the same shoresh of ayin tzadi resh, means to stop in place. So oftentimes you will hear or you'll see a sign that says atzor, exclamation point, that means stop, exclamation point. Or you'll hear a police person say atzor, that means stop, okay? So ne'etzel can mean both he was stopped, but it can also mean in Hebrew he was arrested. And that's a very interesting construct that we have in Hebrew that we don't have in English, for example. We have two separate verbs in English rather. He was stopped by the police is not the same thing as he was arrested by the police. In Israel, in modern Hebrew, it's the same exact verb. So if you're reading the news and you want to know if someone was arrested or was just stopped, you need to read farther along, because if you just see a headline that says Ne'etzal, you don't necessarily know, although chances are they were probably arrested. But chances are you can't tell just on the face of it if they were stopped by the police or arrested by the police. That also has to do with the policing system in Israel, but just know that the same verb for arrested is the same for stopped. Okay, and it's ne'etzal. I'm not going to conjugate it all here. We've talked about this before. There's a great website called pe'alim.org, I believe it is, or .com, P-E-A-L-I-M, and they conjugate all verbs for you. So all you have to do is plug in this verb. You will get the conjugation for every tense there is. Okay, so ne'etzal is the passive of to stop, but it can also mean arrested. I was arrested, not that the police arrested someone. They would use the active form of that, right? So, mishtara atzra, someone. The police stopped, but it could also mean the police arrested in the active tense of this verb. This is the passive form. I was arrested, he was arrested, and so forth. Now, the opposite, because no one likes nor should be stopped or arrested, is shuchrar. Shuchrar is, again, passive form. In Hebrew, we like passive. We've talked about this, I think, almost every week now, and it's very important to understand. When we learn English in elementary school or as young students, wherever you are around the world, America, we call it elementary school, primary school also, we're told that passive is not a good way to speak English. It doesn't sound good. In Hebrew, it sounds really good. In Hebrew, it's considered higher form of the language to use the passive tense. So in this case, shuchrar, he was released. Okay, so shuchra, for a woman, she was released, and so forth. So she was released from arrest. This is the verb that you're going to see. Okay, the next word, lehagish. Lehagish is the infinitive, and it just simply, as I wrote here, to file. This can be to file a memo, a notice, anything. To file. Lehagish is to file your taxes, to file your ballot, all sorts of different things. This is a very common word you're going to see all over the place in modern Hebrew, as well as its verbal noun, which when you go to that website, you'll see, which is hagasha. You've probably seen that word a lot, lehagasha, and then to do something, to file something, click here, or for filing purposes, click here. Now, we're talking about in a police context, so one of the things that often happens is lehagish truna. Truna is a complaint. It comes from the verb lehit lonen. This is a hard word to say for many English speakers. First off, you have two consonants that for most of English you don't have together without a vowel in between, which is taf and lamed. As you see here, there's a silent vowel under the taf, so it's tluna, tlu, tlu. It's a hard sound to pronounce. Refrain from saying teluna. Refrain from trying to put some sort of vowel in between the two. It's tluna. The fact that the accent in modern Hebrew is almost always on the last syllable helps you here to get through it fast. But just remember, it's tluna. It comes from the verb, and we've talked about this before, ingest, but it's very, also, because it's hard to say, lehit lonen, with a lamed. If you don't say it with the lamed, it is a very different word, and you want to be very careful about using that word, because that might get you involved with the mishtara if you use the other word. Yes, tluna is a complaint. You can lehagish tluna neged, which means against, shchenim, neighbors, neged chanut, a store, neged ochev ofanaim, a bicyclist, or neged hamishtara. You can file a complaint against the police, who have their own internal auditing division, just like most police units around the world do. Okay, so tuma is a complaint. Now, the next four words are important because you're going to see these words used a lot in the news, and more importantly, by describing what people are talking about in the news. Each one has a different variation on the other, and they mean different things. So it's important to know when you see these words in the news, but also when you're describing to someone else what's happening. The use of any one of these words says a lot, not just about what you're watching, but who you are and your opinion of it. Okay, so let's go through these four words, rows 16 through 19. Mehuma. Mehuma is one of the words we have in Hebrew for chaos. Okay, we also have balagan, which I'm sure you've all heard before, but mehuma refers to a rabble or a riot, something that's gotten out of hand. It may have been orderly before, it may have been organized before, but it's a group of people that the order, whatever order there was, has disappeared, and it's turned it into a riot. So mehuma is a riot, is the best way to describe it. Now we have this other word, mecha'a. Mecha'a is a protest. Mecha'a is a protest without any qualifications or judgments against it. If something is a social or a political protest or any kind of protest, right? The other word we would use in English is a demonstration, which is this next word. Mecha'a is a protest. This is not, so for example, if someone is describing what happens every Saturday night in front of the Prime Minister's residence in Yerushalayim as a mecha'a, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're for it or against it. They're just describing it because it is a mecha'a. It's a police-sanctioned protest. If they describe it as a mehuma, then you know the political affiliation, because if they're calling a organized, approved demonstration or protest a riot, you know what they think of those people and that action. Okay, so mecha'a is a protest, and it's social, political, whatever it is, it's a protest. It's something against something else. This next word often gets interchanged in Hebrew, and it makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense. The word is hafgana, and you've probably heard this word just as much as mecha'a, if not more. Hafgana literally translates as a demonstration, but when it gets used in Hebrew, it's actually using it in an English context. Because lehafgin, the verb this comes from, hafgana, means to demonstrate a product, to demonstrate a movement. It's literally to demonstrate, like we use in English, right? I'm demonstrating this product for you. I'm demonstrating how to use the Hebrew language to you today. That's what lehafgin means. We use it in modern Hebrew from its American English context of a demonstration, right? If you want to say yesh hafgana, that can be rather ambiguous. We don't know if it's a hafgana of a product or of something new, or if it's a political demonstration. If you want to say a political or social demonstration, it's best to use the word mecha'a. Okay, hafgana will be understood, but mecha'a is more specific. And then we have the next word, tata. This is another word that may be hard to pronounce, that k, t sound, k, t, because there's no vowel, there's a silent vowel under the first letter, kuf, row 19 here. Tata is, as I wrote here, a fight or a scuffle or a brawl. You'll see this, unfortunately, we've seen this a lot over this past summer. You see this in past summers, for example, when there's outside of a nightclub, or we've seen candid camera of at pools. There'll be a fight that breaks out between teenagers or between families, and they'll start throwing things at each other. That's like tata. Tata in modern Hebrew, right, refers to a brawl or scuffle or a fight. Not a fight like a boxing match or a wrestling match, but like a real fight, like out in the street type of fight. And unfortunately, this does make the news, thankfully not on a daily basis, but it does happen enough. You know this word, tata. There may be a ktata that breaks out on the side of a mecha'a, right? So let's say that there are counter demonstrators and they end up engaging in a ktata with people who are from the mecha'a or vice versa. So ktatot do happen. Scuffles or brawls do happen, okay? And then the last word, before I get to your questions, is ktav ishum. This is also an important word. It's been in the news quite a lot in the last year, but this is a very important word regardless. Ktav ishum. Ktav comes from the word lichtov, to write. Ktav is a writ, W-R-I-T. Again, comes from the same idea, writ, write. Ishum is guilt. This literally can be translated as ktav ishum is a writ of guilt, but in everyday English, we would call this an indictment or a charge. This is not the same as someone going to this isn't a conviction. This is an indictment. Okay, so a charge. So for example, again, not getting into politics, the prime minister has 3 kitvei ishum against him right now, right? The prime minister is facing a court battle against 3 kitvei ishum, 3 writs of guilt, 3 charges against him. Ktav ishum is when you're brought up on charges by the police or by the attorney general or by any law enforcement in Israel. Ishum means guilt. In this case, it's one of the 2 words we have for guilt in Hebrew. The other word, and I'm going to write right under it, is bigger. Just see it, and then write it. Ashma. Okay. Ashma is the other word that we have for guilt in Hebrew. Right? Those of you who, we just had Yom Kippur a few weeks ago, Yom Kippurim, as we say here in Israel. And one of the very first words in the confession during Yom Kippur is Ashamnu, right? We are guilty, or we have been guilty of something. Same root, that Aleph, Shin, Mem, have something to do with guilt. And so Ashma, if I feel, Ani malgish Ashma, I feel guilty, or I feel guilt, is this word for Ashma. But Ishum is typically, guilt in a legal or judicial context, not a feeling, an emotion. Okay, so Ashma is more emotion. Ishum is more judicial, legislative, legal, policing. That's the difference of these 2 words, but you're going to see these words again and again. Okay, I'm going to break here because I see we have a bunch of questions, and then we can always go back to that. Stop. Okay. So, okay. Okay, how do you say law? Like it's the law. Okay, great question. So if you want to say something that's the law, you were going to use the word, and I'm writing this now in the chat window here on Zoom, just so you can follow along. You want to know this word. Chok. Chok is a law, but it's also the law. If you want to say that's the law, zeh chok. Zeh is this. Let me write this as well. Zeh chok. Sorry. Zeh chok. Keep spelling back. Zeh chok. Zeh chok. Okay. Zeh chok. Okay. That's the law, or this is the law, is zeh chok. Is how you would say it. Chok is law. Ha-chok, the ha at the beginning means the, or just make something definite in Hebrew, means the, so the law, okay? So we have lots of other words for law, like we said din before. But in this case, when you want to say something is the law, that's the law. If you're, for example, arguing with someone, or you're issuing a complaint and you want to refer to the law, that's what you want to say to someone, that's the law. Okay. Okay. Can you talk about community police? One come to my apartment over a peeping Tom incident. He was reached by a neighborhood WhatsApp group, an appointment was made to not go through an emergency number. Is community policing a big thing here? That's a great question. So each municipality has its own, makes its own decision whether it has a community police. And so, for example, here in Tel Aviv, it does have a its own system of community of policing. It's not really policing, that's a wrong word to use. It's more like community watch that's funded by the municipality with municipal workers behind it. It's not like community watch in, for example, neighborhoods in the United States where it's neighbors, civilians doing it. That's a Tel Aviv thing. There are smaller communities throughout Israel, right? A yishuv is a small community in Israel of all different kinds. And they may have their own form of community watch, community police that may be civilian, that may be paid. Each municipality, each governing body on the local level has its own system of that. Tel Aviv is relatively new. It's part of your taxes that you pay through Arnona, the municipal taxes, goes to paying for local security. It's more like a security system than it is policing. They don't really have the ability to issue tickets in the same way that the police do, for example, God forbid, peeping Tom or something like that. But each municipality has its own. So what I'm saying about Tel Aviv is not the same about another municipality, is not the same about a small town. Each one has their own thing. It's similar to other places around the world, right? Some communities have it, some towns have it, some don't. Okay. I'm loving, by the way, all these people who went to JDS. I'm a JDS graduate myself, so it's nice to see you all saying that. There'd be 3 dots under the shin and also the vav next to it. Don't know what you're talking about there, but answer that as well. A rally. Okay, so a rally, again, we don't, a rally, like you're saying, you'll probably use the word hafgana. When you're seeing it in the news, for example, in America right now during election period, right? When they're covering the elections, you'll usually see the word hafgana or hafganat tmicha. Hafgana means demonstration, like we said. Tmicha means support. But rallying in that way, we do have in Israel, even before the plague, but it would usually be hafgana b'tmicha or hafganat tmicha. You wouldn't use the word mecha'a. Mecha'a is a protest, like straight through. Hafgana, though, like I said, is a little bit more ambiguous, so you'll just attach to it what you're talking about. Okay. Harry, sorry, we had a question before Harry. So that was Louvain's question. If ever pulled off by the police on the road, is it true that the driver is to get out of the car and never approach the police and approach the policeman? No, you don't get out of the car. If you're tagged, if a police person tells you to move over, you'll hear it by either the siren going off and or the loudspeaker attached to the car will tell you to move to the side. If you don't know those words, you shouldn't be driving. Sorry to put it so bluntly, but if you don't know driving words in Hebrew, policing words in Hebrew for drivers is irrelevant. So I'm not going to go through those right now. We can do a driving lesson at a different time, but in the meantime, if you unfortunately are pulled over by the police while driving, you stay in your car. They'll ask you for your registration, but don't get out of the car. Don't get out of the car. Okay. Harry asked about lagish. Yes, lagish means to serve or to file. Lagish, to serve a complaint, to file a complaint. We use it the same way in Hebrew. This is not to serve like a waiter serves you. This is to serve, like I said, a file, a complaint, a review, just to also to file, for example, if you're filing a request for something, or you're filling out a form to apply for a job, that would be the same verb. Okay. Can I show all the words in Hebrew writing? Sure, I'll do that again, Alyssa, I assume. Would there be 3 dots in a diagonal under the shin and also above with the dot attached to the middle? Okay, great question. Steve asks about shuchlau. So let me go back to the vocab list so you can see this. So in Hebrew, we have 2, in modern Hebrew, right? We have 2 ways to write the U vowel, U. One is 3 dots, and you see it here in this verb shuchlau, right? Row 13. One is to do 3 dots diagonally under the letter, and that says U. The other is to put a vav with a dot in the middle. Now, you'll see that in the word, for example, tluna. Tluna has that, and does not have like in shuchlau. The difference is primarily grammatical. And the reason it's written like this is because when you put in automatic nikud, the dots that indicate vowels in formal Hebrew, it'll give you both options. In formal Hebrew, you would not have the vav there. You would only have it, you have it there to make it clear to the reader, or because you're reading this, it's clear to the reader we're using the passive form, right? Because if I didn't have that there and I don't have any vowels, I could read this verb as either he was released or he released. I could read it as both the passive or the active. When I have one of these letters, otiot kri'ah as we call them, they're reading letters. They're letters that both have a consonant and a vowel sound attached to them. Vav is one of those, right? It has the V sound, but can it also be U or O? Just like the letter Yud can be Ya or a elongating a vowel like E or A or I. So same thing here. If I were to take out that Vav and there's no vowels under it, I don't know that word unless I read it really carefully in context, and even the context may not give me the answer I want. I may not know if it's active or passive, and that can change the whole meaning of a sentence, right? In proper Hebrew, you would just write those 3 letters, those 3 vowels, and you wouldn't need the vav. If I'm not writing vowels, which is the vast majority of Hebrew writing, modern Hebrew writing, I need the vav, because the vav is telling me without any vowels, this word is shuchral and not its active form, shichrel, okay? So that's the difference here. When you're putting in vowels, you'll see either the 3 dots or the vav with the dot in the middle. When you're not writing with vowels, you will usually just see the vav. You wouldn't see the dots anyway because you're not writing with vowels, right? That's a very good question. If you use an automated nikud generator, of which there's a couple online, it's going to give you this answer. So it's important that you see it so you're able to understand. Either way, this word is shuchrar. Right? Shuchrar, whether it's with 3 dots, vav, no dots, shuchrar is he was released. Okay, great question. Okay. Zoe asks about the website. If I'm not mistaken, I'm going to write it in the Zoom chat window. It's pe'alim.com or it's pe'alim.org. It also has an app, so it's not just online, it's also an app for your phone. It's a great website to use. For those of you who are learning how to conjugate verbs, if you want to quickly be able to conjugate a verb, it's a good one to know. Okay. I'm loving all the JDS talk. Amazing. When to use din and when chok, Marlene asks. Okay, so din is the word that we usually use for both judgment, because that's the word where it comes from, but din is also the word that they'll use in legalese Hebrew, talking about existing laws on the book. So when we're referring to judgments or laws that have been passed either through legislation or judgments that have been passed through the court system, they're going to use the word din. Okay? Din also has a more religious connotation. So you're going to hear it in that context. Whereas chok is going to be used as law. That's going to be with regards to legislation or laws that need to be followed, or this is the law, not just a particular law, but the law in general is chok. So that's the major difference between the two. Chok, you're going to use regardless of your profession. Deen has a much more judicial, legislative, more judicial actually, context that unless you are a lawyer, you're not going to be using on a regular day basis. M asks, what's the best Hebrew dictionary app in your opinion? That's a great question. It is definitely not Google Translate. I would say the two best ones out there are called, and I'll write this in the chat window, is Context Reverso or Milon Morphix. Sorry, Milon Morphix. Not melon, milon. Milon is the Hebrew word for dictionary. Context Reverso or Milon Morphix are the two best, not just because they give a much more accurate definition of words, both in Hebrew and in English. They also give you oftentimes the audio sample of it, and they will give you a sample sentence to go along with it. It won't do the long form translation that Google Translate will do, but Google Translate is about, when it's good, it's about 50% correct, as opposed to the more accurate Context Reverso and Milon Morphix. So those are the best. Okay. Zoe and Russell, like I said at the beginning of this lesson, we give the vocab list out through this call. So you're going to get a link tomorrow. If you signed up for this, you're going to get a link to watch the recording of this. Otherwise, when we do this, you're welcome to screenshot or write down like old school notes on the words. But I teach in a lot of places and I teach for free, so I don't give out the vocab list for free. But if you can screenshot or just watch the recording tomorrow, you are welcome to write them down yourself. Okay. MilonOnline.net is a great one. I don't know this one as well, but it's a great one to check out as well. Any last questions with regards to the lesson today? Any other questions in general about Hebrew? Nope. You can raise your hand if it's too hard for you to write. Yes, Judy. Sorry, you need to be unmuted.
Judy, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you go over those links again, the vocabulary links and the two other links for translation? They went very quickly.
Which ones?
The one for vocabulary, the website for vocabulary. You had a vocabulary thing, you peel them, I couldn't get the rest of it.
Pe'alim. If you just scroll through this, the Zoom chat, you'll see it. It's pe'alim.com or .org. Just scroll through the the group chat just click on chat and you'll be able to see it. Just scroll back up and it's written up there. It's pe'alim.com or .org.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me just find it.
Yeah.
How do you scroll back up to the chat?
It's I wrote it at 6:45. There's a scroll bar.
Is it muted or unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought there was a difference. That Natsar was usually more like he was detained, like the police detained him, and Kalu is whether he was jailed, when he was actually arrested.
So that's a great point. In everyday, in mainstream news, and that's a great question, they don't necessarily say that. They will simply say someone was ne'etzar, and that can mean everything you just said. That can be they were stopped, they were arrested, they were detained. There's no differentiation of those two things. Now, if jailed, that word beit kele is jailed. Kalu is it was jailed as in the participle. That's a very specific thing. They were imprisoned is more or jailed. But you will often see, for example, if there was a mehuma or a ktata, right? A riot or a scuffle or a brawl, and someone was stopped, detained, arrested, they're going to use all the same verb, which is ne'etzar. So unless you read further, you're not going to know if they were just all those different things. But yes, you will see another word. It's not seen as often in mainstream news. You will see it though, I'm writing this in the group chat. I'm writing this even though, again, you're not going to see it as much. Let's see if it's going to let me. Is nikla. Nikla comes from this word, right?
It's the same word.
Oleh is one of the words we have in jail or prison. Nikla is he was imprisoned or he was jailed. You'll hear this word more as like they were jailed for a sentence of something, not as in they were jailed while after being detained. Usually they'll just say they were detained and then released in the morning or something along those lines. Okay. So, but it's a word for sure. Kele, like I said, is prison. From that, we get the word nikla. He was imprisoned or he was jailed. It doesn't always have to be a he. That's just the default that we use in Hebrew grammar. But yeah, that's a good one to have. Okay. Kathy, so I don't know how to pronounce your name. Ali can help you with link registering to each week. That's her cup of beer. Okay. Kathy, thank you.
Jay?
Yes.
Are we going to also do conversational Hebrew in this?
So like I said, yes. So like I said at the beginning, typically, a lot of people here are at beginners levels. We don't do as much on Zoom, also because it's Zoom. But like we said, starting next week, we are going to have breakout groups where you're going to be able to speak. But typically, we do more formal here because a lot of people here are at very beginners levels.
Okay.
Really meant for that, for people who don't have that space to be able to have these conversations elsewhere. But yes, absolutely, we're going to start doing that next week.
Great.
Okay, any last questions before we wrap up? Great, awesome. As always, not only thank you for joining, but if you have any requests for topics that we do, we're all ears. Email Ali or email in the chat window just now. And we're always open to suggestions. You really want this to be as user friendly as possible. So as much as there's lots more topics to discuss, we really want to leave it up to you to bring up. Malka, we've been doing this for a couple of years now. And because of the plague, we're now online. So thank you for joining. Thank you to all of you who are new joining. Toda rabba, as we say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.